So, today I want to talk about the worst consequences of child labor. In last week's video, I spoke about Louisiana Republican Representative Roger Wilder and his attempts to remove lunch breaks from minors in his state. This week, I'd like to explore just how bad the consequences of child labor can actually be. Since child labor in the United States is on the rise, and certain US politicians are trying to expand the types of jobs and the number of hours that children will be working, it is important to think about what the worst case scenarios can be for a child working under these conditions. And that means that we have to take some time today to pause and discuss the potential reality of children dying on the job. Now, I want to do that today by discussing the circumstances of several teenagers who died in industrial accidents last year and relate their stories to the political realities that we're currently facing, especially with new bills being introduced all the time that are going to increase the amount of children working, some again as young as 14 and 15 years of age. Before that, though, it's worth remembering that many occupations can already be dangerous enough when performed by adults. However, due to developmental factors, children and even adults up to 24 years of age are significantly more likely to experience work related injuries than adult counterparts that are older. The fact remains that well into early adulthood, bodies can still be developing, and more significantly, the brain can still be developing, especially in the area of the frontal cortex. This part of the brain is associated with decision making and helps people avoid risks and risk taking, meaning that teenagers who are working at 16 years of age are far more likely to exhibit risky behavior than adult counterparts. When this is accompanied, of course, by social factors like poverty, it can make many young people less likely to speak out against their boss's wishes, even if they have safety concerns. They're also going to be, by definition, some of the least experienced people on the workroom floors, and thus may not be aware of protocols or ways to avoid danger and bodily harm, especially if they're not trained. And in a lot of these places, they're not trained. When we combine all of this with the fact that teenagers are far more statistically lacking sleep than adults, we already have, the reality that they're working a ton from school and any extracurriculars that they want to do. Add to that the fact that some states don't require meal breaks, and you have instances where tired, overworked, and hungry children are left working for exhausting lengths of time in facilities with dangerous hazards. And that can leave a child maimed or dead. And I hope this also recontextualizes Representative Wilder's bill from last week a little more, as his bill will leave a lot more children in positions where they are hungry and working long hours. And I'm sure even in a Smoothie King establishment like the ones that Representative Wilder owns, there are ways that Representative Wilder has never even considered for teenagers to get injured. And the fact is, he never really has to consider those positions. Because as the boss of not just one restaurant, but 19, he is very unlikely to know the conditions and happenings of each specific location and their floors. Meaning that it is very likely that he's not even aware of the ways that children could get injured, especially again when they are tired and hungry. That said, though, let's move forward to the main topic of today and talk about these three teenagers, again, all 16 years of age, who tragically died in industrial accidents last year, only 5 weeks apart from one another. First, we'll look at the story of Will Hampton. Will Hampton was a 16-year-old boy from Kansas City, Missouri, who was barely old enough to legally work at Lee's Summit Resource and Recovery Park, a recycling center. While on the job on June 8th of 2023, he was pinned between a semi and its trailer. He was essentially crushed to death. I've been unable to find any further information on whether or not there were OSHA violations present here, and few articles have done more than mention his name after this initial incident was reported on. However, it seems absurd to me that a 16-year-old should have been allowed to work at a facility that does construction and demolition recycling and deals with household hazardous wastes. Even if this was totally above board and completely legal, it seems like a dangerous environment for a 16-year-old to start their summer job with no experience, with no training, and in a situation where they were left alone on the site long enough for something like this to happen. Now, it's also worth noting that the child labor laws in Missouri only apply to those who are under 16 years of age, meaning that regulations for 16 and 17-year-olds default to the bare minimum of the federal standards. However, the Missouri legislature has, of course, been working hard not to protect children like Will Hampton and make sure this doesn't happen again, but instead to remove some of the restrictions put on those under the age of 16. The primary focus here in Missouri has been to make it so that 14 and 15-year-olds no longer require work permits and only require a parent to sign a permission slip going forward. This is better than other states, of course, which have cut out all forms of having some sort of requirement for a permit, including the parental permission slip. And that's a disturbing reality. But even in this case in Missouri, this would cut out a huge chunk of oversight by schools and the labor board, and will likely lead to negative outcomes, as the only two people involved are the parent and the place of employment. And if the parent doesn't know all the laws and everything that is going on in the state, then they essentially have no protection for their kid. Just their permission slip and it's done. Again, this is why we have labor boards. This is why the schools are also brought in. This is why we have these types of protections in place. It's also worth noting that early versions of this bill in Missouri wanted to extend the work hours for children under the age of 16. Until, of course, it was discovered that the bill would then be in conflict with federal law, meaning that when we look at a state like Missouri, the only thing keeping it in check right now is the bare federal minimums. But with that said, we should move on to our next case. The story of Michael Scholes, a 16-year-old boy from Wisconsin. On June 29th of 2023, Michael was attempting to unstack a wood stacking machine at his job at Florence Hardwoods, and he became pinned to the machine until he was asphyxiated. It's worth noting that in Wisconsin, it's actually legal for someone under the age of 18 to work in what's known as a planing mill, but no other types of logging or sawmill jobs. The company asserts that Scholes and all other underage employees were working in such a planing room. Despite this, however, OSHA issued 47 different citations for the company, and federal investigators found that between November of 2021 and March of 2023, 3 children between 15 and 16 years of age were injured on the job at the company. One of them was injured twice. And you had 9 children between the ages of 14 and 17 working using saws and other machines, which are federally considered illegal for children and anyone under the age of 18 to be working. But don't worry, because Republicans in the federal government are here to help the businesses like this one, as they attempted earlier in 2023 to push a bill that would allow some 16 and 17-year-olds to legally work in logging. And I'm sure if they have their way, they will push it even further in the years to come to make sure that all 16 and 17-year-olds are able to do so, in the name of stimulating the economy or something. And despite all of this information that has been shown, it's worth noting that half of all children in Wisconsin who worked in a lumber mill ended up getting injured on the job, according to this 2006 study that I have on screen at the moment. You look at where kids got injured, and yes, it's only a certain number of kids, right? Like, fine. But at a lumber yard with 47 students, 40% got injured. And manufacturing, out of 41 kids, 37% got injured. In a lumber mill, 35 students total were working, and 51% got injured. These are significant values, even if the exact statistics are not 100% accurate based on low numbers of students. Meanwhile, the only thing that stopped Wisconsin from eliminating work requirements for 14 and 15-year-olds was a veto from the Democrat governor. And we really shouldn't have to rely on a Democrat governor to be the one to prevent and hold up the works to make sure that 14 and 15-year-olds in Wisconsin actually require work permits. And this is, of course, despite the fact that kids who get work permits are actually statistically far more likely to receive on-the-job training. And it is also shown, while not in this particular case, in another article, that prohibiting teens from working long or late hours actually improved safety training and increased communication between teens and their coworkers and supervisors, and all of that together made occurrences of injury potentially less. So, with all of that said, our third story today is a story that happened on July 14th of 2023, where a 16-year-old boy named Duvan Perez died while working at Marjac poultry plant in Mississippi. As part of the sanitation crew, he was trapped on the conveyor belt and pulled into the machine while attempting to clean it. There was no lockout or tagout procedure to disconnect the power to the machine or prevent it from unintentionally starting during the cleaning operation. For those who may not know what that is, there are locks that are supposed to be put on by manager or some sort of tag device that can prevent the machine from being turned on while it is being maintained. So with that, OSHA cited the company for 14 serious violations and 3 additional less serious violations. Now, this is, also the third death at this facility since 2020. And on top of it all, it's illegal for the facility to have hired this 16-year-old in the first place. The trouble is that in this situation, the company's liability is limited because just like the Hyundai subsidiary that I covered almost 2 years ago, Marjac used an outside agency called Onin Staffing LLC to do their hiring. This means that Marjac had only, to say, oh, we didn't do it, we didn't know, and to use plausible deniability as an excuse for hiring a minor. Even if it should have been pretty obvious and was to many people on the floor that this person was in fact a child. That said, according to Marjac back in 2023, though, they were devastated at the loss of life and deeply regretted that an underage individual was hired without their knowledge. The company is, of course, going to undertake an audit and, they're going to make sure that this kind of error never happens again. This was only last year that they said this. Except it did happen again. It's already happened again. This time in their Alabama facility. In fact, the Department of Labor investigators said that they discovered on May 1st of this year oppressive child labor conditions at the poultry plant in Alabama, namely children working on the kill floor, deboning poultry, and cutting carcasses. And this was all discovered via a civil search warrant. The children had been working at the facility for months, according to the filing. And at this point, what's there left to say? Mississippi and Alabama are not planning on eliminating the loopholes for these companies. And in this instance, Mississippi has no labor protections for 16 and 17-year-olds beyond the federal mandates, just like the other states we've covered. These are children, 3 children, who lost their lives, who lost their futures. And for what? For the economy? For some business to make extra profit and avoid paying an adult a living wage and providing them the training necessary? One that might be less statistically likely to get harmed? These children were all subjected to dangerous conditions, in which at least 2 of the 3 companies received numerous violations for the way they handled their business practices. The companies couldn't even be bothered to have proper safety precautions in place under the restrictions we currently set up. And somehow we're supposed to just trust these companies? We're supposed to be like, oh yeah, we totally trust you with the safety of children with no oversight. And instead of course, trying to remedy the situation or make sure that something like this never happens again, these legislatures are moving in directions that are going to expand their labor pool of children and are going to make it so much harder and so much worse and remove any sort of protections and oversights for these kids. And that's going to lead to more children getting maimed or killed in the years to come. What else do you say? What else do we say about this? Something has to change. Something has to be done. And at this point, these legislatures certainly can't be trusted to do it. That all said, if you've learned something here today, you can support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. You can also check out the links in the description down below to join the Discord, where we have conversations on topics like these, and we can continue to talk about what to do in circumstances like these. And there's a link down below also to my Patreon, where you can financially support the work that goes into researching these types of videos. But please only do so if you're in a financial place to do so. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you so much for watching.